So, Chapter 11 has to do with the cotton economy and the revolution of cotton, especially as it's being developed by the factory system. The fact that the factory system is constantly demanding more and more cotton. And since it's demanding that, of course, with Western expansion and this opening up of territory, you have this kind of internal migration of slaves that are moving into places like Georgia and Texas, and and those kind of places, Arkansas, to expand cottons because this is how people are making money. And so the question says, analyze the contradictions in the cotton economy. So we're looking for part of the issue. Well, obviously, right here, if you look at the images, one is a pro-slavery cartoon depicting slaves as happy, and this is a wonderful scenario, and they should be glad to be slaves. And then you've got this one that is slaves waiting for sale. Clearly, a very different kind of picture than what the cartoon shows. So you immediately have a contradiction there. The other contradiction you might see if you look at, say, George Fitzhugh, who argues that slavery is better. He kind of compares Southern slavery as being, from the Greeks and the Romans, and how it's so much better than the North and their system of wage labor, and even calls it a communist system as though it's a perfect kind of environment. Really kind of elevates this attitude, this atmosphere of slavery as being something that people should appreciate. Now, of course, if you contrast that with Solomon Northup's description, where he's talking about, you've got a contradiction there with Northup describing the slave market and slavery as he's experiencing it. You could also contrast that with Nat Turner, who clearly is seeing, references slavery as being a serpent that God has sent him to basically redeem the South. The last is first, the first is last. So Fitzhugh and Nat Turner and Solomon Northup, that these are all showing different contradictions. This idea, is slavery, is it this happy system, this perfect system where people, where there's not competition and where people are allowed to thrive, or is it an environment that is really horrible, that is maddening, that is brutal, that is cruel, that begets cruelty in a lot of ways. And then, of course, and I kind of didn't do these in order because I think that if you look at Harriet Jacobs on rape and slavery and contrast that with the sermon on the duties of a Christian woman. So the sermon is basically talking about how women, basically the responsibility for making their husbands happy is the woman's job, that she needs to guide her husband, she needs to please her husband, and that she is kind of that moral center, right? So we've talked about some of these separate spheres of men and women, and we've seen that as kind of a common theme throughout some of these chapters. And you definitely see that, that you have that situation being referenced here in this, with this sermon that's directed towards Southern women. Now, if you contrast that, if you look at the contradiction with Harriet Jacobs, who's clearly describing frequent rape of slave women, and obviously that white women would not be doing that bad of a job with their husbands. If you have the sermon on the duties of a Christian woman portraying women in this very kind of idealistic way, this is the proper sphere. And then you look at Harriet Jacobs' account and you have her talking about how many women are raped, how many women have children, how they can't admit to it, that, you have a clear contradiction in the system there. In the way slaves are treated, and the humanity of slaves, and the potential of slaves, both religiously and intellectually, and the role of women. What is the contradiction in women, trying to navigate the system where white men are in control and have all the power? So I think that these documents definitely kind of represent how the cotton economy and the cotton system really has a lot of contradictions in it. And it's really based, in fact, on persuading people to believe the bright side of it, right? The bright side, oh, well, slaves are happy. And and everything's perfect, right? Which, having read Northup's book, you're familiar with the fact that that is really not the case. So I think that, these documents, and just kind of think about how the documents contradict one another, how they kind of wrestle and pull against each other. And you can read through them. They're generally fairly easy to understand, I think, as far as their writing. So hopefully that helps you with if you choose to do chapter 11.